Hi folks, you're on the Insecurity Project podcast with Jamin. Today my guest is Joel Primus, all the way from Vancouver, well just outside of Vancouver, a little farm. And Joel is a former athlete, he is an entrepreneur, an author. He has done some amazing things with his life, and as we'll soon hear. I'm fascinated to really talk to Joel about his journey from transitioning his identity from defining as an athlete and an entrepreneur to understanding the impact of insecurity and what next. So I'm sure you'll enjoy this conversation. And Joel, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
It's my absolute pleasure. I'm a big fan of the work you're doing, and I'm sure that I'm sure everyone who listens to your podcast has bought your book, but I cannot believe how important it is. And I don't want to blow too much smoke, but it absolutely deserves it. And I wish I had read the book when I was 19. I really do. We get it at the right time, but
sure.
But it's so good. It's a gift. And I don't say that about a lot of books that I read. So.
Thank you very much. It's certainly been something I've poured my whole heart and soul in, and whenever I get feedback like that, it's very meaningful because, growing up reading books and being moved and challenged and changed by other people's work, the dream of going, I wonder if it was possible to contribute out of my own essence, out of my own journey in the same way, and for someone else to find that useful. So it's always a remarkable thing to have someone say, yeah, you've contributed meaningfully in an area and added to the conversation. So,
yeah. And the thing about books that's so cool, and I think this will be the case for your book, is, some of the most impactful books I read are written, like 1900, late 1800s, maybe a bit later. And it's like, those books found me 120, 110 years later. And that's when the subject matter is timeless, because it's subject matter of the soul and everything else. So I think that you've captured that vibe, and I think that people will be finding that book for years to come.
Wow, thanks, Joel. So tell us about where it started for you. I'm always fascinated by the beginning of the journey, just because we all start from different places, and I think still people imagine that they're the only one who's had their experience and that's why they're stuck. But hearing different people's story, it's always amazing what impact parents had, what impact certain events had, and just how they got to where they are today. So tell us what it was like growing up in your family and the impact your parents played on kind of shaping your psyche, your sense of self and your beliefs as a young man.
Yeah, which they do. I was curious how you phrase that. We always, because it's true, we always think that it's this had experience. Like, I had that experience and I was the only one. And I've definitely felt that way about certain things. And now it's like the experiences I'm having and who's having them at the same time as me, and like finding people wherever they are in the world that you can kind of have this kindred brotherhood or sisterhood or just unity with, where you're in it together, right? It's not just the past, it's the present, it's the worry about the future. And that's, like, to your point about the things that shape you. And I was mad at my parents for a long time, inside, not expertly. I was taught to be nice, so I'm generally pleasant, but that doesn't mean there's not a storm going on inside. And where that storm arose from, that I didn't realize, was I was, I guess, this quasi-elite runner. And by quasi, I mean, I had a really wonderful career, but if you pitched me against any Kenyan or Ethiopian, they might have had something else to say about my eliteness. But it was a good career. And what I didn't realize was happening when I was doing this until years later was that I started to put all my self-worth in running, right? There was kind of like these two sides, this duality to it, where one side was I was in love with being in nature, running. I'm sure you're a runner, I'm sure you feel that the air, the blood flow, the trees, it just calms the mind. And on the other side, the winning, because I was fortunate enough to win quite a bit. And it taught me, it had this, what I call this feedback loop that you think is positive. Winning equals praise, praise equals I'm good. And all of a sudden, when the vacuum, like whatever you transition out of that in life, and that vacuum sucks it out and it's gone, and you lose that praise, and then I feel good. All of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, who am I? What do I do? What's my worth? And all these different things. But what was a really defining moment for me, there's a couple of them, was I became anorexic as a runner after competing at the World Championships. And it's a very common thing for women. It's unfortunately, the sport is plagued with that struggle for women. And I think that there's a lot changing in that now, but that's a different conversation. But for me, I went to the World Championships and I got toasted, like just toasted by everyone, right? And I just developed in my mind that it was because I was too big. I was too big as a runner. And so I literally starved myself while running 80 miles a week or 20, 30 kilometers a week, depending on where you're listening from. And it got to the point where my whole body broke down. And I realized years later that I didn't have an eating disorder problem. I had an ego and insecurity problem. I had a self-worth problem. And that was just a byproduct of it, right? And I didn't realize that till I was 27, 28, 10 years later, after I'd ruptured my Achilles and lost my scholarship and ran away. I hitchhiked across the country. I went traveling to Asia and then down to South America. And I didn't realize that I wasn't dealing with anything. I was just masking that void, that initial little void. And if we go back to like where the parents shaped me, it's, again, they don't know any better because parents are dealing with their own dreams, their own insecurities, their own failures, their own sadnesses. And so they didn't tell me it was okay. They didn't tell me it was okay not to run. They didn't tell me it was okay not to win, right? And so I didn't accept that in here.
So the sense of pressure was confirmed. The sense of pressure you put on yourself was confirmed by them, and it kept that feedback loop playing that you were winning and your only value was in winning. And so if you couldn't win and you couldn't run, then who were you and what were you worth?
Absolutely. And it's funny when you look back, and we can, because in your book, you use this Michael Jordan example of this man who was fueled by this insecurity, maybe similar to mine. I mean, his was kind of like his brother, right? Was it his brother, that rivalry with his brother that kind of fueled?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so, whoever's mine was, it's the same sort of thing where he, here years later, that insecurity and fueled him to the most incredible heights a human maybe has ever achieved athletically. 5 or 6 others like him. And Phelps talks about this. He talked about this. He suffered anxiety and depression for years even before his last Olympics as a swimmer. I wonder what would have happened if I'd never snapped my Achilles and I just stayed in it for another decade potentially, right? Because you can run an elite level till you're 30. But instead, that snapping I thought the course was this to the Olympics. It branched off in another way and opened the door for self-discovery, sooner than later. And so it's kind of interesting to think back on that. And it's like at the time the world is ending because of this. And I'm just wallowing in it. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait, maybe that was the right thing. Maybe I was supposed to branch off and go down this different path.
Yeah, fascinating what shows up and when it shows up. So tell us a bit about that branching off. Tell us what happened when you couldn't be the runner, and so you had to find another way of validating yourself, I suppose. What happened to fill that void?
Yeah, that's what we do, right? We find a way to validate yourself. And again, because I was so in it, I I was so determined that I found that validation very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
At first it was, I was going to film this movie about traveling the world. And so I went off, and it's like, you're telling everybody in your little small town where I'm from that I'm making this movie. And it's like, wow. When really, it's my brother and I with a video camera. But then when I got to Peru, I needed underwear. And like literally by the time I got to Peru, my underwear was in shambles and it was all crap to begin with. And so I bought some beautiful Peruvian underwear from, Pima cotton underwear from this Peruvian street market, which Pima cotton is like the most delicate, fine cotton, one of them. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so like, this is like way better. But then I hiked up Machu Picchu, and I was like, oh, that doesn't perform very well. And so this idea came into my head. It's like, how do I combine the best of my running technical clothing with this ultra soft thing, mesh them together to create this new standard for men's underwear? And it was like, it's a genuine inspiration. It's as genuine as anyone who's sitting around and all of a sudden has this like problem that they need solved and they want to go after it. There's nothing wrong with the inspiration or chasing an idea. That's a beautiful way to live your life in pursuit of your own creativity and to see what you can do. But what I didn't realize was because I hadn't dealt with that insecurity, and then all of a sudden I'm on national TV, I'm in big department stores, that feedback loop starts happening again. Success equals praise equals self-validation. Again, I didn't realize I wasn't dealing with the underlying problem. And eventually it creeps up. It creeps up on you in not being able to cope with certain failures or public shaming or different things in the way that you might otherwise be able to do. In my case, with self-worth, it showed up with, I had a massive desire to hoard all the credit from my business partner. It's like, no, I'm the face of this company, not you. And that might have been implied, but the fact that I felt insecure about whether or not that was the case, where was that coming from? And at the time I didn't know. I had no idea, right? And so eventually, 10 years later, the success rises. I'm living in New York. I've raised, I think, somewhere between 18 and $20 million for this company. It's uplisted on the NASDAQ. We have an NBA superstar, Dwayne Wade, as a spokesperson. And we sell our company to someone else, and the whole thing implodes. It lost $250 million in value over the 10 years after we sold it. Sorry, not 10 years, in the year after we sold it.
Wow.
And all the while, that bubble that I was in or trying to create for myself to protect myself was popped. And I am left with nothing but the pain, and that manifested in as anxiety, as depression. And now I got to deal. This is the time I realize I have to deal with it, right? If I want to be successful as a father, as a husband, as a business partner, as a businessman going forward, clearly something is there that has to be removed. So
many things to pick up from there, but can you just speak to the idea of insecurity being like rocket fuel in your 20s? So that's one of the ideas I've kind of explored in depth, is that the need to prove, the need to validate actually causes you to, resist all barriers, reject all opposition. No becomes a gift if someone says, no, you can't do that or you won't do that. It's like, okay, fantastic. Thank you. Now you've given me a reason. Like Jordan, he looked for reasons why someone had slighted him or someone had offended him or someone said he wouldn't. And he even sometimes fabricated those reasons. So he had this fuel source to go, right, well, now I've got a reason to go above and beyond what is physically normal and possible. And I'm going to show you. So to take a company, from nothing, from an idea hiking up Machu Picchu to being listed on the stock market, like I couldn't even imagine what that would be like or how you did that. So can you just speak to this idea about insecurity being rocket fuel in that process?
Yeah, it certainly was. I feel like the this is I don't know how this will come across, but I feel like a lot of it comes down to, as part of that insecurity, is this self-feedback loop, but there's this need to impress, in my case, women. So like, and I don't mean, well, what I mean is like, so in high school as a runner, you're not a football star or rugby star or whatever. You are at the bottom of the coolness totem pole. It's just like, you are so far. There's so many layers. So I always, I'd fall in love with a girl, in love, and she'd break my heart over and over and over again, right? And I felt like always throughout my life, that insecurity that was building on the opposite side of this like self-worth thing was in part a fuel, biologically or inherently in me, to procreate, to have a family, to build something that is my kingdom, if you will. And so I feel like the insecurity is in part just inherently biological or evolutionary, in our evolution, to us to do one of the things that we're here to do, which is, bring beautiful new life into the world. So I felt like that was part of it, because to your point, it's like, well, I'm going to prove her wrong. And then that translates to, well, in the competition of it, that person's beating me in a race, beating me in business, essentially makes him superior. And in order for me to survive, I need to outdo this person. And so I started to kind of recognize that pattern later on, was like my willingness or desire to, to build this life meant I had to beat other people to build this life. It was a very unabundant view of the world and what we can, that there's unlimited stuff that we can have. It's a finite view, and that insecurity is, I better grab some piece of this finiteness in order to stake my claim and have what I want. And so I was tireless, like that insecurity of self-worth, of wanting to not be rejected by a woman, wanting to beat out other men in order to put my place and rank. There was no end until there was an end, until the well ran dry.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Was that
beautiful? Yeah, thank you for describing that. I'm sure lots of people will be able to relate to that. So thank you for giving that language. But the way you ended that, I think that's really the interesting thing. Until the well ran dry, like it is, there is a finite amount of energy to be able to drive that strategy, and people crash and burn, typically somewhere around mid-30s, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, but it is exhausting and unsustainable and toxic. And so if you don't find a way to confront that, face that, and make some change, it looks like madness. I think that's the only way of describing what happens. Beautifully, inherently valuable people who act against their own best interests and the interests of others, but don't know how to get out of that. So can you tell us more about the process? Sorry to cut you off. Just fascinated by the process of what you learned when you kind of came to the end of yourself, and the process of discovery and rebuilding, and some of those key discoveries. That'd be really fascinating to hear, and I'm sure the listeners would value from that.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch there. And because the way I see it is, it's a lifetime journey. It's not a one-year journey. It seems to me that we're so flawed in our patterning, in our biological patterning as humans. The way that we hear something, like we're watching a beautiful man or a beautiful woman on the television, and all of a sudden we feel inferior. right? Or some person I've never met in my life tells me I'm crap because my company, he lost his investment, which I understand completely and sincerely, and I hold that. But the fact that then I can not separate the business from my own value as a human being, the fact that we latch on to these things and they become the cycles of our life where it's like we get stimulated, we feel good, something happens, we feel bad, and we can't exit it. And so there's so many layers of that patterning from the traumas of our life, from the traumas of a bad teacher, a bad experience, and it's not any of their faults. We're taking it on. And we have to go back and we have to untether these things and release them. And that comes with unbelievable radical acceptance. And so the process which came about with, I'm going to be very straight. I mean, I had a coach. I had a more spiritual mentor who was he was somewhere between a Zen Buddhist and a business mogul. It's like hybrid there. I had a shaman, and we explored plant medicine as well as non-plant medicine in terms of helping release. I went to sweat lodges, and because that whole journey inside a sweat lodge is you're literally burning that out of you, because there's you just want to scream. It's so hot in there that you end up screaming out layers of this thing. And I read and I read and I read and I read. And so this is really like a 5 or 6 year journey from some level of awareness to some level of felt healing, with still levels of healing left to go. And the process was really, once I became aware that I was telling myself this story that I wasn't worthy, that I went back to where that happened. And again, instead of being mad at my mom or my dad or whatever, because they're amazing, beautiful, loving parents and people, and really always have been, I just had to accept that happened. And it had nothing to do with me. And I would journey back, again, very, mostly just in meditation or out in nature. I'd journey back, and I'd put my hand on the shoulder of myself, future me who's journeying back to younger me. I'd say, it's okay. Like, I'd say that to me, it's okay. Whether it was the running, whether it was my parents' divorce, me taking that on because I felt similar to my father. And so I felt my mother's rejection through her rejection of my father, which, again, there's so many layers to why people separate that I'm only seeing it from one level, and I'm going back to him and saying, that's not your fault. You're a worthy human being. And the more I read, the more I meditated, the more, having a warm bath, spending more time in nature, any one of those things gave me a window to go back and start to just accept all those moments as things that happened, but release myself from the stories that I'd created as a result of those moments. And the best times to do them, which is why it's so hard and so inconvenient, is because the best times to do them are when that emotionality is arising in you, when you are feeling low because of something. Go find out what that something is and go work with it. Start releasing it, start understanding it. You don't have to fix it. I'm not saying you can't fix it. It's happened, but you can understand it. And by understanding it, we can begin to release it. If that makes sense.
Beautiful. Two things I'd love to explore more. Radical acceptance. Can you just unpack that? Is that just the process of going back and saying it happened?
Well, I mean, yeah, yes. A radical acceptance is a term that Tara Brach, she was a PhD Buddhist practitioner that I borrowed from her, but you see it in lots of places. We cannot change our pasts, right? And I mean, I feel like I know that there are people in this world who have had to deal with unbelievable atrocities in their homes, to their families, to their physical bodies, from other people projecting their own insecurities ultimately at them, right? And so, and far worse than anything I've had to deal with. I've sat in ceremony with people who the things that they have shared have, it's like, you went through that, like, oh my gosh. Anyway, so you can't, there's nothing you can do about it. It happened, and you have to accept that first, it happened, and second, that it had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with them and their insecurity and their pain and what somebody had done to them. And that's the nasty cycle that we live in when we don't break our patterns of insecurity. We pass them on either to our children or we project them onto somebody else. And so it's really those two things, and those two things alone: accepting that the thing happened and accepting that it wasn't a reflection of you and your value in your life.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for explaining that. So the understanding was the second piece, and that you've kind of just explained that as well. So acceptance and understanding. And it's very difficult to understand that it wasn't about you when you're living it, because the tendency as a child, especially to personalize and blame, direct that internally as sense-making creatures. So the value of going back is essential, to going back, because you probably can't ever understand it in the moment. The only way you could ever understand it is in hindsight, is to go back and explore. Oh, look at that. I have a new level of understanding now, with more emotional awareness, more time, more distance, more maturity. And now I can understand.
Our lives provide us the feedback opportunities all the time, right? They provide us the interactions. If you started yelling at me on this call, I have a lot of fear still today of hostile behavior. My brother, who is married to a Latina, who is hot-blooded and this amazing, loving human being, he has had to adjust to realize that her passionate outbursts have nothing to do with him.
Yes.
And nor does she feel anything more about them, right? But the point I'm making is the feedback loop part, those things that are buried in us, our lives will always be offering us opportunities to face them, to go and do the work, right? And then when we get one and we move past it a great deal, maybe there's more. But there's no end. The only thing that we learn, I believe, I think maybe some phenomenal human beings can free themselves entirely from themselves. But for the most part, where I'm trying to go is to get to a point where when I face that thing, I have the tools. I might still react, I might still trigger, but I have the tools, and I get faster at putting those tools into effect to move beyond that, right? But we get, the trap is, let's say you're coaching someone and they feel amazing leaving that session. And then 4 days later, they get re-triggered, and they feel so bad that they got re-triggered that they can't put the tools to work. They end up going back down into the pain of it. And I catch myself doing that all the time, but that's where, like, if you just have a pause, you can, awareness, okay, acceptance, okay, understanding, and put those three things to practice. Which, again, from your book, to praise it, I mean, you were always driving the underlying thing to the thing that they were coming and saying, help me, like, this is what's happening. It's like, nah, I don't think that's what's happening, right? So.
Yeah, I love the way that you describe this, but this idea of between stimulus and response is choice. And I think it was Viktor Frankl who was the first person to point that out. And through his very real lived experience in concentration camps to say, look at this, it appears like I have no choice in this, but I do. Even in this horror, there's a stimulus and there's a response, and I could pause and decide how I'd like to respond. And that one bit of technology, that one thought, Stephen Covey says that's the thing that separates us from animals, really, is our ability to think about our thinking, the ability to stop and pause and choose an alternate path rather than just being triggered, acting instinctively and carrying on in a pattern of behavior that has no end. And every time we do that, I think we give ourselves more choice, and that awareness leads to more awareness, and we begin spiraling upward, and our growth continues. Every time we avoid that, I think it is a descent into being an animal, being animalistic in our passions, in our instincts, and that doesn't lead to the development of our human consciousness. That's for sure.
That's a big topic. Do we want to go there?
All right, yeah, maybe another conversation. It seems like we could have endless conversations about this. You mentioned reading was a key part of your process, and I imagine still today you do a lot of reading. Have there been key books that you revisit, that you recommend, that you gift? What have been your favorite books along the way?
Yes, the list is long, but The Way of the Superior Man, David Deida, both for men and women. My wife and I read it the first time we seriously considered separating from each other.
Oh, wow.
There was only two, but they, that was the first time that helped us understand the energetic and thus response differences between male and female energies, or masculine and feminine energies. Mm. And it gave us context. That context, to your point, gave us the pause. Pause to work with, to see, oh, this is what's channeling here energetically. So that was a big book. I've gifted that book more than I've gifted any book, period. And some men pick it up and they read it, and others say, I can't get through it. It's too much.
I've just come across that book in the last 6 months, actually, and I feel exactly the same. It's an extraordinary book, and now I gift it wherever I can as well. And some people, it's like, I can't deal. Others like, this is the right book at the right time. But extraordinary.
Intimate Communion by him is another great one.
Okay.
He gets a little farther out there on some of his other stuff, which even I haven't been able to digest. But those two strike this wonderful chord that I think, like your book, essential reading, Awareness by Anthony DeMello, The Obstacle's the Way by Ryan Holiday, Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. I mean, there's so many. Meditations, Marcus Aurelius, this intersection of sort of Western Stoic thought, Eastern philosophy, even aspects of the teachings of the Bible, all of it, I feel like there's these wonderful intersections where it doesn't matter your ideology, your faith, your spirituality, you can pull these core elements that keep reoccurring in different ways and pick which one fits you for what you're dealing with. And when you talk, just to take a very simple point, Ryan Holiday, The Obstacle's Away. Inside every obstacle is the lesson embedded. Hence, don't avoid the obstacle, find it. But then you take a sort of, I don't know if it would be Taoist or whatever, but if you kind of go into this other chain of thought, and it's like, well, you just avoid the obstacles because that's actually the path of least resistance. You just go around them, right? And so maybe the point I'm making is maybe there's a time when it's just too heavy. So you don't go pick up the boulder. You do need to be gentle and skirt around it, float around it. But that boulder is going to be waiting. But hopefully by that time, you're ready to face that obstacle, right? And that's why this is a process. It's not, I mean, I don't know how long you're with your clients, 6 months, a year, 10 years, but it's genuinely a 10-year process, right? And sometimes we need others to carry us. And sometimes our wisdom and our strength in a higher power or ourselves can carry ourselves. And that's why there's lots of books.
There's lots. Amazing. Yeah. I saw a quote yesterday, which has stuck with me. I didn't think it would. I read it and I thought, no, that's nothing. But then as you were talking, then it just came back, and it was, I'll misquote it, but the basic idea was that sometimes the most pure form of self-love is to realize that now is not the time for change. Yes. And to your point, that sometimes the avoiding the obstacle would be the purest example of loving yourself. Other times it would be to face it head on. And I think just that ability to realize that it's okay, and there's nothing to prove and nothing to defend, and we only do what works. So that's a big point in the coaching process, when people kind of let go of the judgment of, I need to be better, I need to be different, and kind of realize, no, we only do what works. So if it wasn't working, you wouldn't have been able to sustain it anyway. It looks to the surface that it's dysfunctional and all terrible, but it is unsustainable if it's all terrible. It's meeting your need, it's keeping you alive, it's validating you. So sure. So part of you does love it. Part of you is finding value in this path. And sure, you want to let go of it, and you can let go of it when you're ready, but you don't have to let go of it. And there's no judgment around a right or a wrong path.
You're so bang on, and I think that the secret lies in rest, and the concept of our Western society, and maybe the whole world at this point, where rest is a bad thing, where an animal, to give them credit, when they're injured, they rest. When we're injured, and I don't just mean a broken arm, it can mean a broken heart. We don't rest. We are taught that rest is weakness, that we need to roar on, and then in fact, that's when we mask. That's when we protect ourselves. It's like, put the rock tape on if you're a CrossFitter, which I do, the rock tape on so that I don't miss a workout. As a runner, as yourself, and there is a certain amount of courage in that. I'm not denying that. We are humans and we have to keep going, but there are, what's the Ecclesiastes? There's a time for everything, right? Am I saying that right? Ecclesiastics. There's an appointed time for everything, which includes rest, which includes being vulnerable, which includes feeling your weakness, because being able to feel that is in itself strength. But everything that most of us have been taught from the time that we were born is the opposite of that. I catch myself telling my kids all the time, just stop crying so I can have a conversation with you about what's happened. I am teaching her it's not okay to be in that emotion when I do that. And, and I've probably already done it enough times to know that I'm going to have to pay for some counseling later. But
my wife and I we say that all the time. Look, we'll get them a coach when they're 21. Right? It's inevitable. But, but I love, hearing backstories for clients. It's one of the great privileges of being a coach. There's some very vulnerable conversations, and people share some things that they've never even heard themselves say out loud, let alone share with anyone else. But always fascinated by the role of parents and the moments in time that seem to shape and change. And the thing that I love most about those stories is even perfect parents don't prevent their children from picking up limiting beliefs. Even parents who really nail it, who really do a fantastic job, cannot prevent their children from telling interesting stories and not understanding and personalizing. The rest thing, so important. A key moment of transformation in my life was when I took a 12-month sabbatical in the pursuit of working out how to rest. And I got it wrong in a lot of ways early on, because I dived into rest as I dived into work, 100%. So I kind of cut off everything, right? That 12-month sabbatical doing nothing. and found it more traumatic than being, a workaholic until I
Well,
kind of, sorry.
the appointed time.
Yeah. Well, the realization was a rhythm of rest,
Yeah.
rest and work together,
Yeah.
fun and adventure and intensity and work. So anyway, I as a result of that, developed a lifestyle where I have a sleep after lunch, have a nap, a full 90 minutes most days after lunch every day.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary. And yeah, it is a real highlight of my life, actually, those naps. And not many people understand that. Sorry?
Are you waking up super early or going to bed late, or how do you break up your day? Very curious for that.
So I would go to bed. I would still have, 7 to 8 hours sleep. I would still have at night. And then I would have, an hour to an hour and a half in the afternoon.
Good for you, man.
So,
I remember you were so young.
I love it. But one of the interesting things about this idea of rest is whenever a client signs up with me and we send them out the welcome pack to begin a journey, kind of signify, look, this is a big day. Most people will never make an intention to do this level of self-awareness and self-work. In the welcome pack, one of the things is an eye mask. And it's often they're like, why did you send me an eye mask? But what would I do with that? But it's to signify, look, one of the most important parts of this process is rest, learning how to rest, learning how to let go, to switch off, to stop. And it's so counterintuitive and so even more countercultural. It's rest. What are you doing? Like, that's a waste of time. It's worse than a waste of time. You're going backwards if you're resting. But it's a crucial part of the process of awareness, discovery, love, making peace with yourself is learning to rest.
I will say, all your listeners who are feeling guilty about not, I still don't know how to nap. I still have not learned how, outside of a vacation when you carve out that time, or the occasional Sunday. I still haven't learned, and that's been an interesting dynamic of, again, self-worth, and even in my relationship with my wife, where because we weren't balanced in our communications, and we weren't how do I describe it? My naps were maybe selfish because I was working so hard that I thought that my work was more important than her work as a mother.
Yeah, sure.
I am guilty as charged for many, many years. I felt that. And because my work led to money. And we talk about, what's the driver, right? And so I would take naps, and then she would be really upset with me for having taken a nap because she's tired too. And so I, at first, took on this secondary, like, I'm not deserving of naps. But in reality, there was so much more to unpack there between I wasn't seeing her, and I wasn't seeing her tiredness. And we weren't balancing the dynamic of the workload we both were carrying as parent and financial, whatever provider, and that's an equal relationship. And so, again, a story got created, and that's an adult story. I'm an adult at this point.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Of self-worth, because she projected at me, and then I projected back to myself. And then, you know what I mean? So kudos, I guess that's a long way of saying kudos to you. And that's one of the most wealthy dudes I know, takes a daily 90 minutes. And if he can do it, so he can do it, any of us can do it. Well, right?
Of all the growth, of all the defining moments, the positive defining moments, and the things I look back on with most gratitude, it was learning how to rest. I would say that has created more change in me than almost any other thing that I'm aware of. It certainly wasn't an easy decision, but I think that one of the catalysts for that was Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek. I read that book twice. The first time I read it, it blew my mind. And this idea that time, money, and mobility were actually what was luxurious for a human being, and that was the best of what we could hope for. And just realizing I had none of those three, and that most people I knew had none of those three. Even the people who looked successful, all, you know, even if they had money, their money was tied up to their business, so it wasn't very liquid. It was requiring all of their time, and they were stuck to one location. And so I just thought, my goodness, if I can free myself and get time, money, mobility, that would be extraordinary. But I made a conscious decision to think, well, which one would I start with first? Because if I think if I chase money first, I reckon that's probably the trap. I think that's the thought is, well, when I have enough money, then I can rest. When I have enough money, then I can have time. I'm not sure you ever get there. I think the trap would be, well, I never have enough. So I thought, right, well, I'm going to get time back. That'll be my first one. And I don't know how I'll pay for it. But that's what I'm going to do. So the 12-month sabbatical was a very dangerous move to go, I don't know how this is going to work out, but there's only one way to find out. So let's have a look.
What was your balance between trusting that it was going to work out, that the money was going to backfill the time value, and designing it? And Tim Ferriss, again, like, I think he invented the word lifestyle design.
Yeah.
So I think he did. I'm not sure, and intentionally then saying, okay, if I want time, and I'm going to the money part's possibly a trap, which I think you're right. Where was your balance on just letting it unfold versus designing it as you went?
Hard to say in actual fact. It felt like the first thing was to go, I'm surrendering into this. This is the right decision. I'm walking through this door, 12 months, no work. Then I decided that's not really sustainable, and it's not really what I want anyway, because to do nothing is just as bad as doing everything. So then it was the thought, well, what if I could design this? If I could have the ideal scenario, what would I do? So then it still wasn't really about money. It was about contribution and work and enjoyment and things that I'm good at. So I thought, ideally, I'd only work 24 hours a week spread over 7 days. There'd be high energy and low energy, and every day there'd be fun, there'd be rest, there'd be work, there'd be play. And then I thought, well, then how would I create if I only had 24 hours to work, what activities in those 24 hours would be the most effective and the most productive, most financially rewarding? So that's kind of how I began to think about that challenge.
Yeah, that's great to give yourself that. If I only had this, it forces you to think, right? From a startup perspective, there's a great example. I'm not inside the startup, so I can't speak to it, but the same founder started a company that's now worth $4 billion and another one that lost, I'm told, $300 million. And guess which one started first? The $4 billion one. This one started with $100 million in investment, and it ended up losing everything. Because when we're not forced to think like an entrepreneur, where it's like, I got 5 options, I got one choice. In your case, you limited the hours. And so I'm just going to do everything. Like in this other case, we end up tipping the scales and not looking at things through that hard lens that allows us to make better decisions and ask better questions to ourselves. The better questions leads to the better decision. So I love that you did that. I love that you went, if I just had this, it reminds me I need to redo that exercise. Because I've taken on tons of consulting contracts and the plate went.
Yeah, it's been useful across a number of areas for me. And I think it's Parkinson's law at play as well, which is work will expand to the amount of time given for its completion. But that equates to everything. Expenses will expand to the amount of profit available given to spend. You know, the more you earn, the more you spend. So the kind of putting compression pants on yourself and creating some kind of arbitrary limitations is useful to defeat that kind of psychological bias in many ways. So what's next for you? Where are you taking this thing? I'm fascinated by when you looked at the horizon. Where do you see your life going? What project you're already working on? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I used to think I knew, right? I used to think, like, when I started the underwear company, that was it, right? There's a linear line with some pain points, but otherwise I'm going to blast my way through there, right? In a sense, I blame it on the running, because the running it's A to B. You still have to work hard, you still have to struggle, but it's A to B. There's no detours.
Mm-hmm.
Life's not the same. There's plenty of detours, A to B. So I'd started another company, a travel clothing company. We did a phenomenal Kickstarter, and then COVID-19 happened, and so the company's going, but it's still going. But it taught me, in the span of 3 weeks, the entire travel around the world can shut down. If that can happen, anything can happen. And I need to be more flexible as an entrepreneur and less rigid in how do I adapt and morph into the fast changing world of life, the life that we live, without giving up. It's not about giving up. It's about giving in, right? Saying, okay, we need to adjust. We need to move the margin left or right in order to get to the same goal. So the book, I'm incredibly excited about it. It is like, it's effectively the book I wish I'd read as an entrepreneur. I call it a book of questions, because although it's woven through the narrative of the story of Naked, it asks the questions that I needed to know to ask as a first or second time entrepreneur. The answers vary depending on your business, depending on your personality, all these different things, but the questions are always the same. And there's lots of them. And so I point people to the questions they need to ask. And I'm really excited to share that message. But moreover, I see entrepreneurship as a journey of self-acceptance and a journey self-acceptance and self-awareness, because we go kind of tying it back to the original part of our conversation. It provides all those opportunities to always be learning and growing as a human being, because you're always facing new things. So how do I apply? How do I let go? How do I, like you said, if I only had this, so I think it gives us such a wonderful path to create our lives and our inner strength and cultivate those things. And I really want to help entrepreneurs do that. With the business hat as well as the self-awareness hat, and put those two things together and see where that goes. I don't know. I could lead somewhere else. I don't know.
Amazing. Where's that book available?
When is this coming out?
Oh.
That book will be available probably. I think I'm going to keep it just to Amazon for the first little while, and just have a very simple central point of distribution. It'll be audio, digital, as well as hard copy, and it launches January 15th.
Okay. Wow. Very exciting. One question, this is a burning question I've had since the moment I read your bio and heard your story. And it's a question I haven't asked you yet. Did you get to meet D Wade?
Oh yeah, many times. Oh God. I'll tell you the story. This shows you what a graceful human being D Wade is. Okay. So it was I think it was the first time I met him. It was the first or second. It kind of blurs together. I went to his basketball camp. So like I played with him. Well, wow. I played in the same area as him. I don't know I was at the level playing with him, but he goes to me, he says, "How do you shoot, Joel?" Referring to, someone in basketball, like not in basketball, do I hit 5 out of 10 shots or, whatever, how's my shooting percentage? And I said, without even thinking, I hit 9 out of 10 shots. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't hit 9 out of 10 shots. Wait, and I said, no, I mean, sometimes, and other times I hit 1 out of 10 shots. And he just stares at me and he's like, you and everybody else in the NBA. So it's like, there's a guy who just is real. He knew I was like nervous and he just, he went with it. So
amazing. Well, there you go. That must have been a real treat.
Oh, he's cool. He's cool.
Seems like a good place to leave the conversation. Very rich conversation. I'm so glad that we recorded this, which is wonderful. Where can people find more about you and your work and get ready for this book?
JoelPrimus.com is everything. That the book will be there. My blogs are there.
Great.
Companies I work with, everything. So yeah, JoelPrimus.com.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for your time, Joel. Thank you for sharing so honestly. And there was so much wisdom in there. I'm sure the listeners will greatly benefit from that. So thanks a million.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
We'll leave it there.